I think I've noticed tremendous incoherence in our public discourse. And I'm not claiming to be the first person who has noticed this, or that this one is the only one that exists. But I just wanted to show my thesis of why this is the case. I've noticed that people generally tend to support public libraries. They give access to people to any book, and it makes everyone be able to access content online. Not only online, there's also versions of ebooks which are landed online, but also the physical thing. Public libraries are made for this. So that's one thesis. That's one statement which is held by society as being correct. And then on the other hand, people mostly do not support the existence of, or the capacity, or the act of downloading ebooks for free without respecting the copyright law, which is something I believe to be incoherent. Those two are not clearly detached from each other. The difference between those two is not black or white. If you go to a library and you get a book and you read it, you are in that moment consuming the content from the book, from the author. The author wrote that book, and that has been determined socially to be accepted, to be delivered into public libraries, but not into some portals online in which you can download the ebook version for free without respecting the copyright law, as I said before. And I'm not going to argue against copyright law in this video, at least. That's not my objective. What I'm trying to point to is that the difference between infringing copyright law and permitting the existence of public libraries is not clear-cut. And people seem to just ignore this fact because it would be too inconvenient to deal with this. Isn't it true that if someone reads a book from a public library, the odds of that book being sold to that person is immediately decreased? How could it be the case for that to not be the case? It is also true that the border between those two, the view that says that public libraries are an appropriate thing and copyright law is an appropriate thing too, are blurred even more when you take into consideration the fact that 99% of the time we invest paying attention to a book is precisely when we read the book. So why would it be that having the book in your bookshelf would be the thing that would make it immoral if you haven't paid for it? Because it is not immoral to read the book itself. The immoral act, according to society, is to get access to the book in a permanent manner. And that is tremendously incoherent, because the difference is not clear-cut, as I said before. It's a transition from a black to a white, in which I don't even believe there to be only one dimension, and the transition from black to white is unidimensional. But I'm sure there's more factors happening here, or occurring simultaneously. But the fact that having a book on a permanent manner on your bookshelf is the thing that differentiates morality from immorality seems to me as tremendously arbitrary. That cannot be the origin of a rigorous moral stance. And maybe no moral stance towards anything can be rigorous if subjected to such a rigorous analysis as I'm trying to do now. So maybe that's where everything comes to, that if subjected to enough rigorosity, everything falls. And knowing that, we have to come into a sort of solution socially, which is not perfect, but is good enough. And we accept as a dogma a statement that holds simultaneously two views which are mutually exclusive: the existence of libraries, public libraries, and the immorality of violating copyright law. Those two have to be believed in a dogmatic manner and not be considered. Because if they are, you would notice that the border between those two is not so clear-cut. And once you do that, you realize that maybe the moral stance is not as correct. So what if I was able to get an ebook which would auto-destruct after a few weeks? Let's say The public library next to my house happens to give you access to a book for 3 weeks. So let's say I'm able to download an ebook for 3 weeks, and then it gets encrypted into a version which I cannot decrypt. So I just delete the file. What if that could be the case? It would be equal to me getting lended a book from the library, except from one thing. There would be no limit to the supply of books that the public library next to my house could give. So that might be the thing differentiating what is moral and what is not. But why is it that one book lended simultaneously is morally correct? And even if that book is read by people once per week for all of the eternity, wouldn't that be equal to augmenting the supply of books that this library has? That doesn't seem coherent to me. What if people were able to read a book in one day? So they got it, they read it, and then they lend it to the next person. Even if they have to go through the bureaucratic process of giving it back to the library and then the library getting it to the next person in the queue. If that was the case, I do not believe anyone would claim that to be immoral. In the same way that they do not do it with the current system. It just happens that people do not read books in one day, and that they do not have such a high demand, because people tend to happen to have a preference to having the book in a permanent manner in their bookshelves. But this is just an arbitrary fact of the constants of the universe. What if that preference wasn't there? It's just absurd. How are we going to base a moral stance towards copyright on an arbitrary feature of our psychology? Is that the thing that should determine what is made and not the economics behind the incentives of producing books? I do not believe that our arbitrary tastes are the thing having to determine what our stance is towards the copyright law. So let me elaborate a bit on how, if we were trying to maximize the revenue of authors, having a public library would not do so. Okay, so there's another claim against this theory about what I'm arguing that says that giving authors a public showcase in which they can get access to eyes of people would make them more able to increase their sales. Okay, let's assume that's the case. But what is the ratio between the amount of books that are not sold and the amount of books that are sold due to the existence of the book on a public library? No one can tell me that ratio. And even if there's a study done, which I haven't noticed until now, even if there's a study done in which they show that it is sustained across geography and time at, let's say, 2, so that for every book that is not sold due to the consumption of the content by a person, 2 books are sold due to the exposure of that book to new people. Even if that was the case, that wouldn't make the cut, because you would be giving a subsidy to the people who happen to not have that preference towards the book, the physical book, on a permanent manner. Because I'm sure the person who has bought the book doesn't need to memorize or learn or assimilate the concepts from the book in a better manner than the person who just happened to get the book for 1 week, read it, and then give it back to the library. On what stance are we justified to claim that a subsidy to the people who happen to not have the preference towards having the book on a permanent manner on their shelves is justified? I do not say it. It's just an arbitrary rule which seems to just touch on our intuitive and moral buttons in a way that doesn't incentivize further analysis. But when this matter is subjected to further analysis, you realize that it is not rigorous. Why is it that the perfect trade-off between giving people access to books, even the people who earn less money, who would be less predisposed to buying books because they are relatively expensive, is perfectly matched with the other outcome, which is maximizing the revenue of authors so that they maximize their output. This would not be compatible with the existence of public libraries, as I see it, at least. I would like to see if someone who's listening or watching to this would be able to articulate a response to my claims. It seems to me like there's no actual reason why the existence of public libraries should be accepted on the basis of giving access to people, especially poor people, giving them access to books, while simultaneously holding that copyright law should be respected. Those two are not perfectly separated. I believe this matter is one of the biggest cognitive dissonances in society. Maybe not one of the biggest ones, but a relevant and remarkable one. The matter relating to copyright infringement and intellectual monopoly is something of tremendous import. Journals get revenue through selling their publishing services to researchers and then get their further income from charging potential readers of that research for access to it. Researchers pay to publish and pay to read. So that's one side of the spectrum in which copyright law is more scandalously shown to be not correct, especially when public funds are the ones subsidizing both of the sides. If universities are paid for by the government on a major way, and then that university simultaneously pays the researchers who consume and produce their research, that seems to me to be absolutely mind-bogglingly stupid. There's just a guy in the middle which gets all the revenue from both sides of the equation for doing basically almost nothing. I'm sure there's a lot of committees which are extremely rigorous and they analyze the facts in a manner which is much more rigorous than I could do. 100%, that's the case. But the copyright law relating to papers is not in the good side of the spectrum. If we had to fight tooth and claw for something, for copyright law, we wouldn't start by fighting for it in terms of papers, because that's a fight we've almost lost due to the inherent viciousness of the situation. Okay, so what about books, as I was talking about before? More or less the same happens here. It's not like authors do not get revenue out of getting views or consumption from their books. I'm sure authors do get revenue from selling copies of their books, be it in an ebook manner or in a physical manner. But what we happen to have stumbled upon socially, the equilibrium between the two variables, which is the respect and funding to public libraries and the respect to copyright law, is not in an equilibrium if subjected to analysis. And then my question is, should this matter not be subjected to analysis due to the destabilizing nature of it? Or is it that further analysis will allow humanity to progress towards enlightenment in a way that we haven't done until now? And maybe we have been falling into an illusion, a moral illusion, that says that both views can be held together in a coherent way. So if any of you watching or listening are thinking of a way of solving this apparent paradox, please let me know. I would really like to know why it is the fact that both views are compatible with each other. Maybe the response would come from the side of saying there's actually a clear-cut distinction between giving people access to books and respecting copyright law. There's a clear-cut distinction in which it is black or white, a black or white manner. It seems not to be the case to me, but if someone out there is having a thought contrary to what I'm stating here, please let me know. I'm really interested in knowing that.